On July 14, 1917, the technical department of the German Army placed an order with Fokker for 20 triplanes. These aircraft were temporarily designated with the letter F, a mark used for all triplanes. The series included one completed plane and two others still under construction. The first aircraft underwent flight tests at the Adlershof airfield from August 7th to 9th. At that time, it already carried the designation FI. On August 11th, static tests were conducted. The plane was loaded to the point of complete structural failure to check its strength. Interestingly, the official report already referred to this aircraft as Dr.I, although the Doctor designation for triplanes was not officially introduced by the Aviation Ministry until August 19, 1917. The Fokker factory began using this designation right before the start of mass production. The next two triplanes were completed on August 16th, passed inspection, and were immediately sent to the front. On August 19th, both aircraft arrived at the 1st Fighter Wing, based in the town of Mark in Belgium. One triplane was taken by the squadron commander Manfred von Richthofen, while the other went to his friend Werner Voss, commander of the 10th Fighter Squadron. On August 28th, a demonstration of the new fighters was held for the pilots of the 4th Army. The capabilities of the triplane were shown personally by Anthony Fokker. He performed several flights using Richthofen's aircraft. The first combat sortie took place on the morning of September 1st. The trials ended quickly and tragically. On September 6th, Richthofen went on leave, and his triplane was handed over to Kurt Wolff, commander of the 11th Squadron, who had just returned from the hospital on September 11th. But on September 15th, Wolff was killed in aerial combat. On September 23rd, Werner Voss met the same fate. He was shot down, and his triplane crashed behind the front line on British-held territory. The British examined the captured Voss aircraft. Their report noted an interesting detail. The triplane was equipped with a French Rhone engine rated at 110 horsepower, which had been removed from a British Nieuport 17 fighter that went missing on September 11th. The first production series of triplanes began on September 13, 1917. The production aircraft had several differences from the prototypes. Wooden protective skids were installed at the tips of the lower wings. These prevented damage during taxiing on the ground. The wingspan was also increased from 38.6 to 39.4 inches. The stabilizer received a straight leading edge. This modification is confirmed by a factory drawing dated August 15, 1917. Before that, only sketches existed. According to the British report on the inspection of Richthofen's aircraft and the test report of the first prototype, the wingspan measured 38.6 inches. This modification was given the internal factory designation V5. A triplane equipped with a Mercedes engine was designated V6. Fokker built several more experimental triplanes that never entered mass production. At the end of September 1917, an experimental model designated V7 appeared, fitted with an 11-cylinder rotary Siemens Halska engine producing 160 horsepower and a 4-blade propeller. This aircraft was modified 4 times. The next prototype, the V8, was even more unusual. It was a sesquiplane with 5 wings. It featured an elongated fuselage with a Mercedes engine like the V6. The triplane wing was positioned forward, closer to the propeller, while a biplane wing was installed behind the pilot's cockpit. Fokker made only 2 flights in this strange machine. At the end of September, the technical department ordered the second series of triplanes. On September 10th, the factory sent the first 11 machines to the front for the squadron. On October 11th, the first Dreidecker arrived at the 7th Army. It was received by the squadron commander Heinrich Gontermann. On October 13th, another 6 aircraft were dispatched. All triplanes arrived simultaneously on October 20th. On October 25th, the technical department finally decided to complete the triplane testing and attempted to take 2 serial aircraft from Fokker, since previous trials had been carried out with only 1 aircraft instead of 3. Fokker strongly objected, and after negotiations, the department received only 1 triplane. When the aircraft entered combat service, several accidents occurred that were not related to combat. On October 30th, 1917, Lieutenant Gontermann, the squadron commander, wrote in his diary, "I hope we can have greater success than Richthofen's squadron, where Wolff and Voss were killed." His hopes were not fulfilled. That same day, he performed aerobatics at an altitude of 2,300 feet above the airfield when his triplane went out of control and crashed. Lieutenant Gonterman was severely injured and died in the hospital the next day. Witnesses who observed the crash reported seeing a section of fabric tear away from the upper wing, after which the aircraft began to break apart in midair. On that same day, October 30th, Manfred von Richthofen was flying together with his brother Lothar when the engine of Lothar's triplane failed, forcing him to make an emergency landing. Manfred decided to land beside his brother, but one of the engine cylinders on his own Fokker Dr.I broke off, causing him to crash as well, escaping with only a slight shock. The next day, Lieutenant Pastor from the squadron crashed and was killed while flying a Fokker Dr.I. As the number of accidents rapidly increased, flights on triplanes were suspended, and fighter divisions returned to using Albatros DV and Pfalz D3 aircraft. However, all pilots hoped that the cause of the wing failures would be quickly resolved and that the triplanes would soon return to service. The Military Acceptance Commission halted further deliveries of triplanes and on November 2nd appointed a special committee to determine the causes of the crashes. After inspecting the wreckage of several triplanes, the committee concluded that the wing structure could not withstand the stresses created by the ailerons. Their balance tabs produced excessive loads on the glued joints of the wings during flight. To verify their conclusions, the commission enlisted Richthofen to perform a test flight. He flew the triplane at low altitude and maximum speed for an extended time. After the flight, the wing covering was opened and a large amount of condensation was found, which negatively affected the condition of the glued joints. The commission stated that upon inspecting 3 aircraft already in service, the glued joints were found to be in such poor condition that all wings had lost structural strength. Fokker was given the commission's report, which contained 12 points. It recommended strengthening the aileron mounting points, reinforcing the rib structure, coating the internal wing surfaces with marine varnish to protect them from moisture, and other measures aimed at improving the wing's durability. These requirements caused a serious delay in further production of the Fokker. Dr.I Fokker complied with all of them. The new wing looked identical to the previous version but included ventilation valves in the leading edge and an air outlet valve located behind the main spar of the upper wing. Production of triplanes resumed on November 28, 1917. All triplanes that had already been delivered to the military had to be rebuilt by Fokker. Deliveries of updated triplanes began in December, but the element of surprise from the new machine had already been lost. Production ended in April 1918 with a total of about 320 Fokker Dr.I triplanes built. They fought only on the Western Front from September 1917 to June 1918, although some pilots continued to fly them until the very end of the war. The Fokker Dr.I triplane was an exceptionally maneuverable aircraft with an impressive rate of climb. This was achieved thanks to its compact fuselage and large wing area. However, the short fuselage combined with the high drag from its 3 wings made the aircraft unstable in the air and difficult to control. German pilots considered the triplane ideal for close combat. It was more agile than the Spad 7 and the Sopwith Camel. Its main drawback was the insufficient engine power and relatively low speed. Contemporary fighters were much faster. The Sopwith Camel could reach 114 miles per hour, the Newport 27 up to 107 miles per hour, while the Spad 7 was considerably faster at 131 miles per hour. As Anthony Fokker himself said, the triplane climbed so quickly and was so maneuverable that no one noticed how slowly it was flying. Only experienced ace pilots such as Manfred von Richthofen and Werner Voss were able to fully exploit the capabilities of this aircraft. The triplane's first combat mission on the 1st of September 1917 immediately brought its first victory. The commander of the 1st Fighter Wing, Manfred von Richthofen, shot down a lone British RE-8 observer aircraft over the front line around 8 in the morning. 2 days later, Manfred, flying his triplane alongside 5 pilots and Albatros fighters, attacked a British patrol from the 46th Squadron and, without losses, shot down 2 Sopwith pups. In his report, Richthofen proudly noted that the new fighter outperformed the British aircraft. Before his leave on the 6th of September, he decided to rearm the squadrons of his wing, the 6th and 11th with Fokker Dr.I triplanes and the 4th and 10th with Pfalz D3 fighters. A day earlier, on the 5th of September, the commander of the 10th Squadron, Werner Voss, achieved the first of his 12 victories in the triplane. On the 10th of September, Voss shot down 2 Camels and 1 reconnaissance aircraft in a single flight. On the 23rd of September, Werner Voss fought his final legendary battle. He faced 7 British SE-5A fighters from the 56th Squadron led by James McCudden. During the 10-minute battle, Voss damaged every British aircraft and shot down 2 lieutenants, but was ultimately killed by Arthur Rhys-Davids. At the time of his death, Werner Voss ranked second among German aces after Manfred von Richthofen, with 48 victories to his name. By December 1917, the German fighter aviation found itself in a critical technical situation. The Albatrosses were hopelessly outdated, and the Pfalz fighters were not much better. The only aircraft capable of competing with the latest enemy machines was the Fokker, yet by that time only about 30 triplanes had been built. Their large-scale use in combat began at the end of February and early March 1918. British intelligence learned where the German offensive would begin, and in early March the Allies started reinforcing their positions near Cambrai. The 1st Fighter Wing, operating in that sector, engaged in fierce aerial battles. Over 2 months, its pilots claimed 82 victories while losing 6 of their own, including their commander, Manfred von Richthofen. Between the 12th of March and the 20th of April, Richthofen added 17 victories, bringing his total to 80. On the morning of the 20th of April 1918, Manfred took off at the head of a patrol from his squadron. Following him was another patrol led by Lieutenant Hans Weiss, who was temporarily acting as squadron commander. Their mission was to intercept enemy reconnaissance aircraft. 2 reconnaissance planes of the Australian Flying Corps were conducting photographic reconnaissance over the Somme River. The formations of Richthofen and Weiss, 10 triplanes in total, encountered in the air another group of German fighters from a different squadron, perhaps 6 to 10 aircraft. In the same area, 2 German reconnaissance planes were also conducting photo missions. At the same time, 3 British patrols, 15 fighters of the Royal Flying Corps, approached from the enemy side. All of these aircraft took part in the battle. The airfight lasted for half an hour and consisted of several separate engagements. Richthofen was pursuing a British fighter when his triplane suddenly came under fire, from another British aircraft and from machine gunners on the ground. The red triplane began to climb and turn, but then rolled onto its wing and crashed into the ground. On April 22nd, the British buried the German ace with full military honors at a small cemetery near Amiens. The British press published an obituary. Manfred von Richthofen is dead. He was brave, an aristocrat, and a true warrior. May he rest in peace. The 1st Fighter Squadron, formed by Manfred von Richthofen by June 25, 1917, became the most effective among all German fighter units. Ernst Udet, who joined Richthofen's group from another squadron on March 27, 1918, explained their success this way. Other squadrons are quartered in castles or estates 12 to 19 miles from the front. Richthofen's group lives in portable huts that can be assembled or dismantled in an hour. They rarely base themselves more than 12 miles from the front line. Other squadrons make 2 or 3 combat sorties a day. Richthofen's makes 5. Others stop flying in bad weather. These fly in almost any conditions. But the greatest surprise to me was the forward airstrips. We were ready for takeoff only a few miles from the trenches, often within range of enemy artillery. As soon as the enemy appeared on the horizon, we took off, one by one, in pairs or as an entire squadron. At noon on March 27th, Ernst Udet took to the sky for the first time in a triplane with Manfred von Richthofen's group. They shot down a British reconnaissance aircraft, then engaged in a dogfight with British fighters, and Manfred downed one of them. Afterward, they strafed a column of British infantry. Following that flight, Richthofen appointed Udet as a squadron commander. In that battle, Udet achieved his 21st victory, and by the end of the war, he had become the 2nd highest-scoring ace with 62 victories. By the early summer of 1918, pilots were still flying triplanes, although they were already being rapidly replaced by new, faster fighters. Yet many aces still preferred the triplane because it was more maneuverable than the newer but less agile aircraft. A vivid example was Joseph Karl Peter Jacobs, who ranked 4th among German aces with 48 victories by the end of the war. In early 1918, his squadron received its first triplanes, and Jacobs immediately fell in love with them. He mastered the aircraft's flying characteristics so well that he preferred it even to the new fighter that everyone considered the best. More than 30 of his victories were achieved in the triplane. Jacobs was one of the few aces who truly enjoyed flying and fighting in the triplane. He used a risky tactic, flying alone, deliberately exposing himself to attacks from enemy fighters, then suddenly turning sharply to strike back. Usually, such tactics were deadly dangerous, but for Jacobs, they worked. At least they gave him a chance to use the triplane's only real advantage: its outstanding maneuverability against newer and faster enemy fighters. Joseph Jacobs owned 2 personal black triplanes and flew one of them until mid-October 1918. Many other famous aces also flew triplanes: Erich Löwenhardt with 54 victories, Bruno Lorzer with 44, Paul Baumer with 43, Lothar von Richthofen with 40, and Adolf Ritter von Tutschek with 31. When more powerful and faster Allied fighters began to appear at the front, the slower triplanes quickly ended their combat career. They lost their advantage in maneuverability at high altitudes. Many pilots then began to say that the aircraft was hardly worth mentioning. But the problems were not in the plane itself. The low quality of oil and lubricants worsened engine performance and reduced its power. In warm and hot weather, engine overheating and failures became a common occurrence. After June 1918, most triplanes, by order of the Air Force Command, were used as training aircraft to prepare pilots for the new fighter. Triplanes were fully or partially armed in many units of the German Air Force, and there was also an anti-aircraft defense squadron equipped with them. When the First World War ended, triplanes remained in flight schools scattered across Germany. The Allies captured numerous serviceable triplanes at those schools. Many French, British, and American pilots flew them many times before the aircraft were destroyed in accordance with the peace treaty. Although the type was already obsolete by that time, all Allied pilots who tested a triplane in flight were enthusiastic about its maneuverability and rate of climb. Several captured triplanes were shipped to the United States for testing. Later, one aircraft was sold to private individuals. Some triplanes were restored and used in films such as The Purple Heart. The Fokker Dr.I was a single-seat triplane with an unusual design. The 3 wings were arranged one above the other without external bracing wires. The aircraft was built from a combination of wood and metal. The wings had a thick airfoil and a wooden structure with plywood ribs. Control linkages to the ailerons, the movable parts of the wing that control the roll of the aircraft, ran inside the upper wing. The leading edge of the wing was covered with plywood, and the remainder was covered with fabric. The 3 wings were supported without any external wires or stays, except for 2 bracing struts between the metal tubing of the uprights of the upper wing that crossed each other. The upper wing had ailerons that extended beyond the wing tips. They were made from steel tubing and flat ribs covered with fabric. On the underside of the upper wing, there were 4 small access hatches to reach the rollers through which the aileron control cables ran. The middle wing had cutouts on both sides of the fuselage so the pilot could see forward and downward better. There were 6 ventilation openings in the front part of the wings. In the center of the upper wing, above the main spar, there was a ventilation valve. The interplane struts were wooden with metal fittings. The horizontal stabilizer and elevator were made from steel tubing. The rudder was mounted at the tail, which tapered toward the rear. The fuselage was welded from steel tubing with internal diagonal bracing and covered with fabric. 2 triangular plywood fairings were fitted on the sides of the fuselage to join the rounded engine cowling to the rectangular fuselage body. This improved the aircraft's aerodynamics. The aluminum engine cowling completely covered the engine from above and had 1 opening for the propeller hub and 2 circular ventilation openings above the center of the propeller. The aircraft were fitted with a 9-cylinder rotary Oberursel engine rated at 110 horsepower, or engines produced by Finania, licensed copies of the Oberursel. Triplanes used by flight schools were fitted with a 7-cylinder Goebel engine rated at 100 horsepower. The propellers were 2-bladed wooden axial units, 8 feet 4 inches in diameter. Later production aircraft also received Germania propellers. Inside the fuselage, immediately behind the engine, there was a fuel tank of 16 gallons and an oil tank of 4 gallons. In the lower part of the fuselage between the landing gear struts, there was an access hatch to the engine accessories. The triplane's armament consisted of 2 synchronized 7.92 mm air-cooled Spandau machine guns with 500 rounds of ammunition for each. The guns were mounted on the fuselage in front of the cockpit, and the ammunition was carried inside the fuselage in 2 boxes. The two-wheel landing gear was attached to the fuselage on struts that were fixed at the top to the fuselage frame and connected at the bottom by a box in which the wheel axle rotated. A rubber cord served as the shock absorber. The forward struts were connected by two bracing members crossing each other. The box was made to be detachable and streamlined. The rear support was implemented as a lever hinged to the lower part of the fuselage and held at the top, inside the fuselage, on a rubber cord.